This story doesn't begin with an old man, and it doesn't begin with the night he warned me either. It begins with something far more familiar to Americans than we like to admit. It begins with the quiet confidence that comes from believing your life is normal, safe, predictable. The belief that bad things happen somewhere else, to someone else, in another city, another building, another neighborhood. I believed that too. I believed it every single night I lay on my couch, half asleep, scrolling through my phone, letting the TV talk for me so I wouldn't have to listen to my own thoughts. If you've ever lived alone in the US, especially in an older apartment building, you already understand the atmosphere I'm describing. The beige walls that look clean but feel tired. The thin ceilings that carry every sound like a rumor. The faint hum of electricity inside the walls. The kind of place landlords describe as cozy and tenants describe as cheap enough to survive. During the day, it feels ordinary. At night, it feels like it's watching you. The night before everything changed, I heard the noise again. Not loud. Not violent. Just deliberate. A slow dragging sound above my ceiling, like something heavy being moved carefully, intentionally, from one side of the room to the other. I remember pausing the TV and holding my breath, waiting for it to stop. And when it did, I did what most Americans do. I explained it away. Pipes. Old wood. A neighbor walking around late. Anything but the truth, because the truth would require action. That's the part no one talks about. Fear isn't what stops us. Responsibility is. Admitting something is wrong means admitting we might have to do something about it. Call someone. Investigate. Acknowledge that our safe little routines might not be as safe as we think. So I turned the volume back up, laughed at myself, and went to bed, convinced I was overreacting. I slept just fine. That should have been my first warning. The next morning felt aggressively normal. Work emails. Traffic that made me angry for no reason. Coffee that tasted like regret. I stopped at the grocery store because I always did, moving through the aisles on autopilot, grabbing the same items, living the same loop. That's where I saw him. An old man standing near the front, holding a small basket, staring down at it like it contained a decision he didn't want to make. He didn't look homeless. He didn't look confused. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His clothes were clean but outdated, like he'd stopped caring what year it was a long time ago. When the cashier told him the total, I watched him open his hand and count coins slowly, carefully, as if speed might betray him. The sound of metal clicking together felt too loud in the quiet judgment of the line behind him. People sighed. Someone muttered something under their breath. And I felt that familiar American discomfort, the kind that comes when you're close to someone else's problem and hoping it doesn't become yours. I don't know what made me step forward. Pride, maybe. Guilt. Or maybe just the exhaustion of pretending not to see things anymore. I told the cashier I'd pay, and just like that, his problem became mine. He looked up at me then, and I expected gratitude. Relief. A smile. Instead, his eyes narrowed slightly, studying me like I'd just said something dangerous. He thanked me quietly, but his voice carried something else underneath it. Concern. Like I'd crossed a line without realizing it. That should have scared me. It didn't. Not yet. Outside, the late afternoon traffic roared by, horns echoing between buildings. He asked if I could help him cross the street. His voice was calm, almost detached. I looked at the crosswalk, at the cars speeding through yellow lights, and nodded. It felt like the decent thing to do. The simple thing. The kind of small kindness everyone talks about but rarely remembers. Before we stepped off the curb, something in my chest tightened for no clear reason. A feeling I ignored, just like the noise the night before. And that was the moment, the exact moment, my normal life ended, even though I didn't know it yet. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, subscribe now. You're going to want to hear what happened next. We stood at the edge of the curb longer than I expected. The crosswalk signal blinked red, counting down seconds that felt heavier than they should have. Cars rushed past us in both directions, engines roaring, tires hissing against the pavement, the sound of everyday American urgency. The old man didn't seem bothered by the noise at all. If anything, he looked more alert, his posture subtly straighter, his gaze fixed not on the traffic, but on the buildings across the street, like he was measuring something invisible. When the light finally changed, I stepped forward first, offering my arm out of habit more than intention. His hand wrapped around my forearm, and that's when I noticed how cold it was. Not the kind of cold you get from winter air, but the kind that feels internal, like the warmth has been gone for a while. His grip surprised me. It wasn't shaky or weak. It was steady, firm, almost deliberate, like he needed to make sure I couldn't just walk away halfway through. Halfway across the street, he stopped. Just stopped. No warning, no hesitation. 1 second we were moving, the next we weren't. A car horn blared so loudly it made my chest vibrate. Someone shouted something angry from a passing truck. I instinctively tried to pull him forward, panic rising in my throat, but his grip tightened instead, anchoring me in place like he'd decided this exact spot was important. He leaned closer to me, close enough that his voice cut through the traffic without him raising it. He told me something that didn't sound like a warning at first, more like a correction. He said people misunderstand danger. He said we expect it to announce itself, to crash through our lives loudly, violently, without subtlety. He told me that real danger is patient. That it waits until you've convinced yourself everything is fine. I laughed nervously, the way Americans do when something feels off but we don't want to admit it. I told him we should keep moving before someone hit us. He didn't react to my tone at all. He didn't even look at the cars anymore. His eyes were fixed on me now, studying my face like he was trying to decide whether I would understand what came next or not. When we reached the other side of the street, I finally felt the tension in my chest ease. We were safe. The moment had passed. I shifted my weight, ready to let go and continue my day, already mentally moving on, already filing the encounter away as a strange but harmless interaction. That's when I realized he still hadn't released my arm. His fingers slid down and closed around my wrist, tighter than before. Not painful, but intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. His eyes locked onto mine, and something about the intensity of his stare made the rest of the world fade. The traffic noise dulled. The city blurred. It felt like we were standing in a pocket of stillness that only existed for the two of us. He spoke slowly then, carefully, as if he needed every word to land exactly where it belonged. He told me not to trust the noises at night. Not to fear them. Not to ignore them. Not to explain them away. Just not to trust them. The sentence felt unfinished, like there was more he wasn't saying, something implied that my mind immediately tried to fill in on its own. I asked him what noises he meant, still half smiling, still pretending this was just an eccentric old man saying something odd. For a brief moment, I thought he might answer. Instead, his expression softened, almost regretful. He released my wrist without another word and turned away, blending into the flow of pedestrians as if the city itself had swallowed him. I stood there longer than I should have, staring after him, replaying his words over and over. Don't trust the noises at night. The phrase followed me home, echoing louder than the traffic ever had. And as I unlocked my apartment door later that evening, stepping back into that familiar, supposedly safe space, I realized something unsettling. I already knew exactly which noises he was talking about. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. If you're starting to feel uneasy, make sure you're subscribed. What happens next is where the warning begins to make sense. That night, I tried to convince myself the encounter hadn't meant anything. I cooked dinner, watched something familiar on TV, and forced my routine to continue exactly as it always had. Americans are good at that. We treat routine like armor, like if we keep doing the same things in the same order, nothing new can touch us. But even as I went through the motions, the old man's words sat heavy in my chest, pressing down on my thoughts in a way I couldn't shake. When I finally went to bed, I left the TV on low volume, not for entertainment, but for company. The glow from the screen painted soft shapes on the walls, and for a while, I managed to drift into a shallow sleep. It didn't last long. At exactly 2:11 a.m., my eyes snapped open. No dream. No gradual waking. Just instant awareness, like something inside me had been alerted. The sound was already there. A slow, deliberate drag across the ceiling above my bedroom. Not random. Not frantic. Controlled. I lay perfectly still, heart pounding, counting my breaths, waiting for it to stop the way it always had before. Instead, it continued, moving back and forth with a rhythm that felt intentional, almost thoughtful, like whoever or whatever was making it knew exactly how much noise was too much. I reached for my phone and checked the time again, hoping I'd imagined the first glance. 2:11 a.m. The same time as the night before. And the night before that. My stomach tightened as the realization settled in. This wasn't random. It never had been. I just never stayed awake long enough to notice the pattern. I shifted slightly under the covers, my knee brushing against the mattress, and the sound stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse than the noise itself. It felt expectant, like a held breath. I froze, afraid to move again, afraid of what might happen if I did. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, the dragging sound resumed, slower this time, heavier, as if reacting to my hesitation. That was the moment the old man's warning finally clicked into place. Don't trust the noises. They weren't background. They weren't meaningless. They were responsive. Acknowledging me. Testing me. And the most unsettling part was how easily my brain tried to explain it away anyway. Maybe it was a neighbor walking around. Maybe it was heating pipes expanding. Maybe I was just tired. My mind offered excuse after excuse, desperate to protect the illusion of safety. I stayed awake until morning, listening, watching the ceiling, feeling every second stretch longer than the last. The sound stopped just before sunrise, fading out like it had lost interest. When the daylight finally crept through the blinds, the apartment looked harmless again. Ordinary. Safe. The ceiling was smooth and still. No marks. No signs of disturbance. It almost felt ridiculous to have been afraid. But fear leaves residue. It changes the way you move, the way you listen, the way you breathe. As I got ready for work, I found myself moving more quietly, listening harder, flinching at normal sounds. Every creak of the floor made my pulse spike. Every distant siren pulled my thoughts back to that frozen moment in bed. On my way out, I paused beneath the spot where the noise had come from. I stared up at the ceiling longer than I needed to, my chest tight, my mind racing. For the first time since moving in, I wondered who, if anyone, actually lived above me. The thought followed me out the door and stayed with me all day, growing heavier with each passing hour. By the time I came home that evening, the apartment no longer felt like a place I controlled. It felt like a place I was being allowed to occupy. And as I locked the door behind me, I realized something that sent a cold wave through my body. The old man hadn't warned me to run. He hadn't warned me to leave. He had warned me to listen. And I was starting to understand why. If this is starting to feel too real, tap the like button now. What I discovered next removed any doubt I had left. The next morning, I woke up exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. My body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something invisible all night, and my mind kept replaying the sound over and over, trying to break it down into something harmless. Americans are taught to trust logic, to believe that everything has an explanation if you look hard enough. So that's what I decided to do. I told myself that before I let fear take control, I needed facts. Real ones. Not guesses whispered by the dark. As I got ready for work, I paid closer attention to the apartment than I ever had before. Every creak of the floor, every faint vibration from the walls made me pause. The building suddenly felt older than I remembered, like it had been quietly aging while I wasn't paying attention. I realized how thin the ceiling really was, how easily sound traveled, how much I'd trusted that whoever lived above me was just another anonymous neighbor going about their life, separate from mine. On my way out, I stopped in the hallway and looked up, as if I could see through the ceiling if I stared long enough. The idea that someone might be walking around directly above my bed while I slept made my skin crawl. Still, I forced myself to breathe, to stay grounded. Fear feeds on imagination, I told myself. And imagination feeds on ignorance. So I decided to remove the ignorance. That afternoon, instead of going straight home, I stopped by the building management office. It was a small room near the lobby, decorated with outdated posters and a faded notice board. The manager sat behind the desk, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when I knocked. I told him casually that I'd been hearing noises late at night and wanted to ask about the apartment above mine. The change in his expression was immediate. Subtle, but unmistakable. His fingers paused on the screen. His eyes flicked up to mine, then away again. He cleared his throat before answering, buying himself a moment. He told me the apartment above mine was currently unoccupied. Empty. Had been for a while. The word settled in my chest like a weight. I asked him how long it had been empty, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, leaning back in his chair, exhaling through his nose like he was deciding how much to say. He told me it had been several months. That the previous tenant had been an older man who lived alone. That there had been an incident. He didn't elaborate at first, but the silence between us said more than his words. When I pressed him gently, he finally explained. The man had fallen in his apartment late at night. No one knew exactly how or why. There were no signs of a break-in, no struggle. He was found the next morning, long after anyone could have helped him. According to the manager, neighbors had later mentioned hearing noises that night, but no one thought much of it. Old building. Thin walls. The same excuses I'd used myself. My mouth felt dry as I asked for the man's name. I already knew, in some quiet corner of my mind, that it would be him. Hearing it spoken out loud still sent a shock through me. It was the same name the old man had given me at the crosswalk when I'd asked who he was. The same voice. The same eyes. The same warning. I left the office in a daze, the hallway stretching longer than usual, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. Every sound suddenly felt significant. Every noise felt like a message I didn't fully understand yet. The logic I'd clung to all day cracked under the weight of what I'd learned. This wasn't coincidence. It was continuity. When I got back to my apartment, I stood just inside the door for a long time without turning on the lights. The ceiling loomed above me, silent and still, like it was waiting. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I felt certain of something I couldn't explain. Whatever had been making those noises at night wasn't just a memory. It was unfinished. If you're still here, subscribe now. Because what happens next is where fear turns into consequence. That night, I didn't turn the TV on for comfort. I didn't play music or leave a light glowing in the corner of the room. For the first time since moving in, I wanted silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that forces you to face what's really there. I sat on the edge of my bed long after midnight, staring at the ceiling, waiting. My body felt wired, alert in a way that bordered on painful, like every nerve had decided sleep was no longer an option. When the clock on my phone clicked over to 2:10 a.m., my stomach tightened. I hadn't realized how closely I'd been watching the time until that moment. 1 minute passed. Then another. At 2:11 exactly, the sound returned. Louder than before. No longer just a drag, but a series of slow, deliberate movements, like footsteps being placed carefully, intentionally, directly above my bedroom. I could almost picture the path they followed, pacing back and forth in a pattern that felt deliberate. I sat completely still, remembering the old man's warning. Don't trust the noises. I told myself that meant not reacting, not acknowledging them, not giving them what they wanted. But listening is its own kind of acknowledgement, and as the sounds continued, I realized how thin the line was between awareness and invitation. My breathing slowed instinctively, my muscles locked in place, and every instinct screamed at me to do something, anything, just to break the tension. The footsteps stopped suddenly, plunging the apartment into a silence so thick it felt physical. I waited, counting seconds in my head, my ears straining for the slightest change. Then I heard something new. A soft knock. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just a gentle, careful tapping against the ceiling, directly above where my bed sat. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. The kind of sound someone might make if they didn't want to wake the neighbors. My heart slammed against my ribs as my mind raced for explanations. Pipes didn't knock like that. Buildings didn't knock like that. People did. And the realization that whatever was above me might be aware of my exact position in the room made my skin crawl. The tapping stopped again, replaced by something even worse. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing, faint but unmistakable, as if someone were lying flat on the floor above me, face pressed close to the surface separating us. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream, to run, to do anything that would prove I was still in control of my own body. The old man's face flashed through my mind, his grip on my wrist, the seriousness in his eyes when he warned me. He hadn't sounded afraid. He'd sounded resigned. Like someone who'd learned the rules too late. Minutes stretched into something that felt endless. The breathing eventually faded, the tapping never returned, and the footsteps slowly retreated, moving away from my bedroom towards some unseen corner of the apartment above. I stayed frozen long after the sound stopped, afraid that moving would somehow reset whatever fragile balance I'd stumbled into. When morning finally came, I felt hollowed out, like something inside me had been scraped clean. The daylight offered no comfort this time. The apartment didn't look normal anymore. It looked staged, like a set built to resemble safety without actually providing it. Every shadow felt deliberate. Every quiet moment felt temporary. I realized then that listening had changed things. Whatever had been happening above me wasn't just noise anymore. It was interaction. As I got ready for work, my hands shook just enough to make simple tasks difficult. Brushing my teeth felt like a performance. Tying my shoes felt pointless. I kept glancing up at the ceiling, half expecting to see cracks forming, or dust falling, or some sign that the barrier between us was thinner than it should be. Nothing happened. The silence was complete. But silence, I was learning, didn't mean absence. It meant waiting. And as I locked my door behind me and stepped into the hallway, one thought followed me with unsettling clarity. The old man hadn't warned me about hearing the noises. He'd warned me about trusting them. And I was beginning to understand that listening too closely might have been exactly what they wanted. If your heart was racing during this part, leave a like now. What happens next is where the situation stops being passive. I used to believe that daylight fixed things. That whatever horrors crawled through the night dissolved under the weight of the sun, reduced to bad dreams and overactive imaginations. That belief died the moment I stepped outside my building that morning and felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not from above this time, but from somewhere close enough to feel personal. The street looked the same, people walking dogs, cars rushing past, a barista across the road unlocking her shop, yet my chest tightened as if the world had shifted half an inch out of alignment. On my way to work, every sound felt amplified. Footsteps behind me echoed longer than they should have. A bus braking too hard made me flinch. When someone laughed nearby, it sounded wrong, sharp and intrusive, like it didn't belong in my headspace. I caught myself glancing at reflections in store windows, checking if anyone was following me, and every time I saw only myself, my relief felt short-lived, fragile, like it could crack at any second. At work, I tried to sink into routine. Emails. Meetings. Small talk by the coffee machine. I even forced myself to laugh at a joke someone told, desperate to feel normal again. But beneath everything ran a constant awareness, a buzzing sensation at the base of my skull, as if my mind was holding its breath. I kept thinking about the old man, about how calm he'd been, and how that calmness now felt more terrifying than fear ever could. Around noon, I noticed something that made my hands go cold. A faint smudge of dust on my jacket sleeve, pale and chalky. At first, I brushed it off as nothing, construction residue from the sidewalk, maybe drywall dust carried on the wind. But then I remembered the ceiling above my bed. The way it looked untouched. Too untouched. And suddenly, that dust didn't feel random anymore. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked darker, ringed with exhaustion that felt too deep for one bad night. I tried to ground myself, listing facts in my head. I live alone. I didn't imagine the sounds. I didn't invite anything in. But the words felt weak, like affirmations pasted over a growing crack. When I returned to my desk, my phone buzzed with a notification from my building's management app. A routine message, nothing urgent. Scheduled inspection this week. Tenants may hear maintenance activity. I read it 3 times, my pulse climbing with each word. Maintenance activity. At night? Above my bedroom. The timing felt too convenient, too perfectly placed to explain away what I'd experienced. And that's when I understood something that made my stomach twist. Explanations could be just as dangerous as mysteries. That evening, I didn't rush home. I stayed out longer than usual, walking aimlessly through crowded streets, clinging to the noise and movement like a lifeline. The idea of returning to my apartment made my chest tighten, but avoiding it felt like surrendering control. When I finally unlocked my door, the silence inside greeted me like a held breath. I stood in the living room, lights on, coat still on my shoulders, listening. Not just with my ears, but with my entire body. The apartment felt different. Not colder or warmer, but aware. Like it remembered me. I shook my head at the thought, embarrassed by my own imagination, yet unable to dismiss the sensation that something had shifted while I was gone. I checked the ceiling again, this time with the lights fully on. That's when I noticed it. A faint hairline crack running just a few inches longer than I remembered, stretching outward like a thin scar. It could have been there before. Buildings settle. Materials age. But my intuition screamed that this crack was new, and that it wasn't accidental. I backed away slowly, my heartbeat thundering in my ears, and for the first time since this started, I felt something worse than fear. I felt anticipation. Whatever was happening wasn't confined to the night anymore. It was bleeding into my days, my routines, my sense of reality. And deep down, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. If I didn't act soon, the noises wouldn't need the dark anymore. If this story is pulling you in, hit like now, it helps more than you think. And tell me in the comments, would you stay in that apartment, or leave immediately? The next morning, I made a decision that scared me almost as much as staying silent had. I was going to talk to someone in the building. Not management, not a faceless email or automated response, but a real person who lived here, who might confirm that I wasn't alone in this. The idea that someone else had heard the noises felt like oxygen to my anxious thoughts. Proof that this wasn't just my mind turning against itself. I started with the woman across the hall, a middle-aged tenant who always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and smiled politely without ever lingering. When she opened the door, her expression was warm but guarded, the kind of face that knew how to end conversations quickly. I explained, carefully, casually, that I'd been hearing strange sounds at night from the apartment above mine. I laughed lightly as I said it, trying to make it sound like a minor inconvenience, nothing alarming. Her smile faded almost imperceptibly. Not into concern, but into something tighter, more controlled. She nodded once and said, "Old buildings make noise." Her tone was flat, rehearsed, like she'd said those exact words many times before. When I pressed gently, asking if she'd ever heard anything similar, her eyes flicked past me, down the hallway, as if checking whether anyone else was listening. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. Then she wished me a good day and closed the door. The interaction left me colder than if she'd yelled at me. Denial would have been easier to handle if it felt genuine. But this felt like avoidance. Like an unspoken agreement I hadn't been invited into. I tried another door, then another. Each response was the same, different words, same meaning. No one had heard anything. No one had noticed anything. And no one wanted to talk about it. As I walked back toward my apartment, a strange realization settled over me. These people weren't unaware. They were careful. Their silence felt practiced, like something learned through experience rather than ignorance. I wondered how many times they'd had this conversation before, how many new tenants had knocked on their doors asking the same questions, looking for the same reassurance I was desperate for. That's when I saw him. The man from upstairs. At least, I assumed it was him. He stood near the stairwell, tall, thin, his posture stiff in a way that made him look like he was constantly bracing himself. His face was ordinary enough that it almost faded into the background, yet something about the way he watched me made my pulse spike. Not curious. Evaluative. Like he was measuring a reaction. I hesitated, then approached him, every step feeling heavier than the last. I introduced myself, mentioned I lived below him, and casually brought up the noises. His reaction was immediate. Too immediate. He frowned deeply, his brow furrowing as if I'd accused him of something offensive. "I live alone," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes didn't match it. They were alert, scanning my face for something I didn't want to give. I apologized, instinctively, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That alone bothered me. The way the conversation had shifted so quickly, making me feel like the problem. He softened then, offering a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Probably pipes," he said. The same explanation. The same script. As if the building itself had taught everyone what to say. When he walked away, I noticed his footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Familiar. My stomach dropped as recognition clicked into place. The pacing, the rhythm, the pauses. It matched what I'd heard above my bed. I stood there long after he disappeared down the stairs, my skin prickling with the certainty that I'd just crossed some invisible line. Back inside my apartment, the silence felt louder than ever. I replayed every interaction in my head, searching for cracks, for honesty, for anything that made sense. Instead, I found only one consistent pattern. Everyone knew something. And everyone had decided that pretending nothing was wrong was safer than acknowledging the truth. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized how alone I truly was. Not just physically, but socially, emotionally, existentially. Whatever was happening in this building thrived on that isolation. And as the first faint sound of movement echoed above me once again, I understood that the real danger wasn't the noises themselves. It was the silence surrounding them. If this part made you uneasy, leave a comment, your thoughts matter here. And subscribe now, because from this point on, the story takes a turn no one expects. By the time I woke up the next morning, the fear had shifted into something sharper, more focused. I was done questioning my sanity. If everyone else in the building wanted to pretend nothing was wrong, then I would stop asking and start observing. I took the day off work, telling my boss I felt sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. My body felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish, like my mind was wading through fog that refused to lift. I set my phone on the nightstand before leaving the apartment, voice recorder on, screen dark, plugged into the charger so it wouldn't die overnight. It felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. I didn't announce it to myself, didn't say a word out loud, afraid that even acknowledging the plan might somehow alert whatever was above me. As I closed the door behind me, I had the unsettling sense that I was leaving a trap and wasn't sure who it was meant for. I spent the day in a nearby cafe, pretending to read while my mind replayed every sound I'd ever heard in that apartment. The scraping. The pacing. The breathing. Each memory layered over the next until I couldn't tell which ones were real and which ones fear had amplified. When evening came, I almost didn't go back. I stood outside my building for several long minutes, staring up at the windows, wondering how many of them hid people who knew exactly what I was about to hear. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the noises, but because of the waiting. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, forcing myself not to react to every creak or distant sound. When the noises finally came, they were subtle, almost polite. Slow movement. A pause. Then something that made my stomach twist. A low murmur. Not loud enough to make out words, but unmistakably human. I clenched my jaw, refusing to move, reminding myself that the phone was recording everything. Morning arrived without incident, and for a brief, foolish moment, I thought I'd imagined the murmuring. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the playback button longer than it should have. I told myself I was prepared, that whatever I heard would at least give me clarity. What I wasn't prepared for was how close it sounded. The recording started with silence, broken only by my own breathing. Then, faint but clear, came the footsteps. Exactly as I remembered them. Slow. Intentional. But this time, there was something else layered beneath them. A second rhythm. Another set of movements, slightly out of sync. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. There hadn't been just one presence above me. Then the murmuring returned, clearer now. Two distinct voices. Not speaking to me, but to each other. I couldn't make out full sentences, but fragments slipped through, chilling in their casualness. He's listening. A pause. Not yet. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They knew. Not just that I was there, but that I was paying attention. I stopped the recording, nausea rising in my throat. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. Every explanation I'd clung to collapsed under the weight of that evidence. This wasn't pipes. This wasn't maintenance. This wasn't even random. It was deliberate. Coordinated. And worst of all, it was ongoing. I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying those fragments in my head, trying to convince myself I'd misheard them. But deep down, I knew the truth. The voices weren't surprised. They weren't confused. They sounded patient. Like this wasn't the first time someone had listened in. Like they had a process. As the reality settled in, one thought rose above the panic, clear and undeniable. The old man hadn't been warning me about the noises themselves. He'd been warning me about what happens when you start listening back. And as I stared at the ceiling, phone clenched in my hand, I understood with terrifying clarity that I had just crossed another line. One I might not be able to step back from. If this recording changed everything for you, hit like now. And comment below, would you confront them, or get out while you still can? I didn't sleep after hearing the recording. I lay in bed fully dressed, lights on, phone in my hand, jumping at every tiny sound the building made. Morning came like a mercy I didn't deserve, pale and weak, doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. I kept replaying those words in my head, he's listening. Not yet. They echoed with a confidence that terrified me more than shouting ever could. Whatever was happening above me wasn't impulsive. It was patient. By late morning, there was a knock at my door. Not loud. Not aggressive. 3 soft, evenly spaced taps. My heart dropped into my stomach because I already knew who it was before I even stood up. I checked the peephole, my hands trembling, and saw the man from upstairs standing there, posture straight, expression neutral, like someone waiting for a package delivery rather than confronting a neighbor. He looked normal. That was the worst part. I opened the door just enough to speak, keeping the chain latched. He smiled faintly, eyes flicking past me into the apartment. Building management sent me, he said calmly. They said you reported noise complaints. My mouth went dry. I hadn't reported anything. Not officially. Not to anyone who should have contacted him. That lie landed like confirmation rather than surprise. I told him I was busy and that whatever the issue was, it could wait. His smile didn't falter, but something hardened behind it. It's better if we clear things up now, he said, voice still gentle. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his tone. Misunderstandings can escalate. The word misunderstandings felt loaded, like it carried a meaning only he understood. Before I could respond, he did something subtle but devastating. He reached up and lightly touched the top of my doorframe. You hear things very clearly from below, he added, almost conversationally. My blood ran cold. That wasn't a guess. It was a statement. A reminder that the barrier I relied on for safety meant nothing to him. I told him I'd be contacting management myself and asked him to leave. For the first time, his eyes changed. The friendliness drained away, replaced by something calculating. He nodded once, slowly, as if I'd just made an expected move in a game he'd already planned out. Of course, he said. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. As he turned to walk away, he paused and glanced back at me. By the way, he said casually, your phone records very well. Clear sound. My breath caught in my throat. He couldn't have known that unless he'd heard it. Or seen it. Or been closer than I ever imagined. He walked away without another word, leaving the hallway unbearably quiet. I closed the door and slid down against it, my legs giving out beneath me. Every thought raced at once. They knew about the recording. They knew I was aware. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone. This wasn't observation anymore. It was confrontation. And I had done nothing to prepare for it. I checked my phone instinctively, half expecting the recording to be gone, erased, tampered with. It was still there. Untouched. That almost scared me more. If they weren't afraid of evidence, then evidence wasn't dangerous to them. That meant they had something stronger than control over sound. They had control over outcomes. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I packed a small bag without really knowing why, hands moving on autopilot. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every passing car outside sounded like it was stopping for me. The apartment no longer felt like a place I lived. It felt like a place I was being allowed to stay. As night approached, one truth settled heavily in my chest. The warning had evolved. It was no longer about trusting noises or listening too closely. It was about understanding that once you acknowledge what's happening, you become part of it. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew with chilling certainty that whatever came next wouldn't wait for me to fall asleep. If this confrontation shocked you, leave a like right now. Subscribe is where everything finally comes together, and nothing is the same again. I didn't run that night. That still surprises me when I think about it now. Fear usually pushes people toward escape, but mine did the opposite. It anchored me. I needed answers, not just to survive the night, but to understand what kind of mistake I'd stepped into. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, watching the faint glow from the street lamps crawl across the walls, listening to my own breathing and wondering how many times someone had sat in this exact spot before me, thinking the same thoughts. The noises began earlier than usual. No attempt at subtlety this time. The footsteps were heavier, the pacing more confident, as if whatever rules had existed before no longer applied. Then came the voices, clearer than ever, no longer bothering to stay low. I couldn't make out every word, but I didn't need to. The tone said enough. They were preparing. Coordinating. And for the first time, they weren't just above me. They were around me. That's when I remembered the old man's hand on my wrist, the way he'd stopped me mid-step like he was preventing a fall. His warning replayed in my mind, not as a threat, but as instruction. Don't trust the noises. Not because they were fake, but because they were designed. Distractions. Signals meant to draw attention upward, away from what was really happening. I moved slowly, quietly, toward my front door, resisting the urge to look at the ceiling. When I pressed my ear against the wood, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Breathing. Not above me. On the other side of the door. Someone was standing there, close enough that I could hear the faint hitch in their inhale. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. The noises upstairs had never been the point. They were the cover. Time stretched as I stood there, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to react. Instead, I did the one thing I hadn't tried yet. I stayed completely still. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't listen harder. I disengaged. Minutes passed. Then more. The breathing eventually stopped. Soft footsteps retreated down the hallway, slow and deliberate, mirroring the ones I'd memorized from above. When the building finally went quiet, I left. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I walked out into the night with nothing but my phone and my keys, my legs shaking, my mind painfully clear. I understood then why no one else talked about it. Why they pretended nothing was wrong. Survival didn't require understanding. It required compliance. I never saw the old man again. I moved cities within a week, cut ties, changed routines, erased patterns. Sometimes I wonder if that was enough. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up convinced I hear footsteps, careful and patient, moving just out of sight. But I don't investigate anymore. I don't record. I don't listen back. Because now I understand the warning in full. Don't trust the noises means don't let them guide you. Don't let them control where you look, what you fear, or how you react. The moment you believe the sound is the threat, you stop seeing the real danger. And if you're listening to this story right now, feeling that unease settle into your chest, do yourself a favor. Pay attention to what you're focusing on. Ask yourself why. Some warnings aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to keep you alive. If this story stayed with you, hit like now, it helps more than you know. Comment if you think the narrator made the right choice. And subscribe to the channel, because some stories don't end, they just stop being told.